Let me say that CureJM, remarkably, is just now starting to celebrate our 20th anniversary, which is an extraordinary milestone for any nonprofit, but I think particularly for a nonprofit who works or that works in in the rare disease area that we do. And if you think about that for a moment, that's 20 years of committed focus from volunteers just like you, and where we also began with, really virtually nothing but a vision and a lemonade stand. And 20 years ago, families could not have found a network of support or a website with extremely valuable information on juvenile myositis. Pediatric rheumatologists were generally unaware of the disease and had little idea how to treat it. And there were really no treatment plans or protocols as thoughtful and complete as those that we have today. Discovering better treatments and clinical applications of those treatments is an incremental process, and we very much today stand on the shoulders of those volunteers who went before us, those researchers who were funded by CureJM and who provided the fundamental building blocks of understanding this disease and doing something about it. While we have farther to go in finding a cure, your leadership has really resulted in extraordinary promise as we move forward. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and Dr. Adam Huber will be sharing his thoughts as a CureJM medical leader shortly. From my perspective, and my background is really one that focuses on drug development, really looking at what new treatments are in the pipeline that will prove to be better treatments than those that we have today. And in the last 8 years since I've been here, and even before, due to the support of many of you on this call, we have a lot of exciting drugs that are in the pipeline or about to go into the pipeline. And in fact, I'm going to touch on just 6 of them by name. I won't go into any detail, but I think the one we're going to hear about most next that sounds kind of weird, but I think you know what I mean. Next in line is a drug. We'll be seeing a paper coming out on it at the end of this year for a drug called abatacept. It has a trade name, Orencia. This drug has been in a clinical trial at the GW, George Washington CureJM Center of Excellence over the past roughly 3 or 4 years. That trial is completed. We don't officially know the results. Unofficially, we think the results are really quite positive. So stay tuned for the publication of that paper towards the end of this year. I think it will make a big impact upcoming in the pediatric rheumatology world. A second drug that's in 2 clinical trials is a drug from Lilly called baricitinib. It is approved for other indications, including rheumatoid arthritis. It's going into a second clinical trial at the National Institutes of Health, and is also in a separate independent clinical trial taking place at about 15 locations in France and supported by the French Pediatric Rheumatology Society and the French government. Those are 2 very exciting trials, both looking at the potential for this drug to be a better, improved, effective treatment for juvenile dermatomyositis. There was a clinical trial in a small number of juvenile myositis patients that took place at NIH a couple of years ago that led to this larger confirmatory trial. And in that trial, all 4 patients saw significant improvement in both skin sores and muscle strength. So I think we have a lot to feel positive about the potential for this particular drug. 3 others I'll just mention without going into any detail. Vamorolone, you've all heard about vamorolone as a potential new steroid, one with far fewer side effects than the existing steroids that our children use. We are in back and forth negotiations at the moment with the FDA about the design of a clinical trial for vamorolone. We have both the manufacturer and the distributor of vamorolone solidly behind our plans to conduct a clinical trial in juvenile myositis. We're very hopeful that we can get this approval for vamorolone in the first half of 2003 and actually get to work on a detailed clinical trial design for vamorolone in the second half of 2023. Another most promising drug that was discovered by or I shouldn't say discovered, but its potential applications in JDM was discovered by a program that was funded. Thank you once again, Marge Coffey, at the NIH. That was a sort of a high throughput drug screening project that we did, where we screened all 2,300 approved drugs in the US and internationally for effectiveness in JM. A drug that is owned by BMS called deucravacitinib. Deucravacitinib, not approved by for any indication, but Bristol Myers Squibb, the owners of deucravacitinib, have expressed strong interest and are in conversations with several members of our medical advisory board about a clinical trial in deucravacitinib, which in this high throughput screening program that we conducted at NIH was the highest performing drug in terms of its potential impact in treating juvenile dermatomyositis. So we're very excited about that. That's in the very, very early stages, and at the moment is in the control, if you will, of Bristol Myers Squibb and a couple members of our medical advisory board. So more information on that as well in 2003. We're pushing on that as hard as we can. But let me just say that, you know, they call big pharma big because it's very big, and it's hard to push them as fast as we would like to. And finally, another trial in a drug called Ultomiris. That's an AstraZeneca drug that is in clinical trials right now for adult myositis, but included in that trial design is the opportunity for individuals with active JDM over the age of 18 to participate in that particular trial. And we'll be starting some recruitment with AstraZeneca for that particular trial here in early 2023. And I think all of these sort of follow the pattern, if you will, of a drug that you all may have heard of called rituximab, which went through a clinical trial. Gosh, I think it's been 10 or 12 years now since that clinical trial has taken place and the paper was written, and really the outcome of the trial, while it didn't meet all of the endpoints that were hoped for, it turned out that it was quite effective as an alternate treatment for patients who were not responding to traditional steroid treatments in the treatment of JDM. And rituximab has now become essentially a very effective arrow in the quiver of treatments that JDM clinicians can use around the country and around the world. So that's the same kind of thing that we're looking to accomplish with these 5 other drugs that I just mentioned. That will be a very, very heavy focus for us as we move into our 20th anniversary. The last 3 things I'll mention real quickly, and then I want to turn it over to Nikki Hahn, is that CureJM has also not only emerged as a very strong domestic leader in research, but very importantly, and this is really quite important, we're quite an international leader as well. There's a great amount of research that's taking place internationally in Canada, in the United Kingdom, in France, as I mentioned earlier, in the Netherlands, in Italy, et cetera. And through the Global Conference on Myositis and the grants that we have made to these institutions in these countries over the years, we're also emerging as a fairly strong player and funder in a whole different environment of JM research that's taking place, on the continent and in the United Kingdom. And we'll be continuing to do that because you never know from where the better treatments or cures might come. And some of the researchers in these countries where we're continuing to make research investments are extraordinary in what they are doing. And like our NIH, many of them also have a significant amount of government support. So we're able to leverage the money that we raise with funds that are supporting those institutions. One last item, I also want to say that CureJM, under the leadership of Suzanne Edison, who's on this call, a former board member of CureJM and member of our research committee, has also established ourselves quite solidly as a leader in emotional and mental health development, specifically looking at JM kids and JM patients, but what's really having a much larger impact across all pediatric rheumatology. I think the best example I can give of this is that in 2 days, on the 13th, we're having essentially a mental health training and indoctrination program, if that's the right way to put it, that is being attended by 70 pediatric rheumatologists and medical professionals, not just from across the United States, but from across the world, including South America, Asia, Canada, and Europe, who will all be listening to a program, if you will, or I shouldn't say listening, dialing in on a virtual seminar, essentially, 2-part seminar, 6 hours total, on how to integrate mental health into pediatric rheumatology care. And Suzanne and several clinicians around the country that we're working with at the Children's Hospital of Colorado and Hospital for Sick Kids in Toronto, to name just two, are providing the leadership and really setting the standard in this particular program. And it's something that, again, you all have supported. And we're just getting an extraordinary return for a fairly small investment that we've made initially in this program. So as we go into the 20th anniversary, I just want to say that we are, standing on the shoulders of folks who have gone before us. That we've got an extraordinary foundation of building blocks of progress. That we're moving into an era of clinical trials that is harder and more challenging than anything we've ever taken on before. But I'm extremely confident that we're going to succeed with one, if not two, or not three of these drugs, and possibly others that, aren't even on this list yet, as we look to the possibilities of a brighter future for JM kids. You've made all of that possible through your leadership, through your participation in the Holiday Challenge and Walk Strong Across America, and I could go on and on looking at all of our fundraising programs, but it is those programs that make our investments in research possible, and I can't thank you enough for that leadership. With that, I want to turn it over to our supreme leader, and that's the chairperson of the CureJM Board of Directors and JM parents, Nikki Hahn. So Nikki, over to you. And again, thanks to all of you for being with us.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you for that comprehensive update on all the hard work we've all been contributing. I'm so excited to see a big group of leaders gathered here today. As you know, I'm a parent, and as Jim mentioned, the chairperson of CureJM's board of directors. And of course, I'm a fundraiser out there pounding the pavement, raising dollars, just like all of you. I wanted to give a quick update on some of the board's priorities for next year. As Jim mentioned, 2023 is a very special year for us. It's our 20th anniversary. And like he said, for a small, rare disease nonprofit like us to not only survive 20 years, but to thrive is no small feat. Our success and continued growth and the impact we've made is a testament to all of our families that work tirelessly to make progress possible. So thank you. I know that you have so much on your plate, and I appreciate every minute you commit to helping CareJM. The 20th anniversary will build throughout the year. And then, of course, we will have a big celebration in person in Washington, D.C. at the family conference. I am so excited, as I know many of you are on the call, that we are resuming our National Family Conference after many, many, many long months of COVID. We will be meeting June 29th through July 2nd in Washington, D.C. So put that on your calendar if it's not there yet, because I really, really hope to see all of you there. The National Leadership Council will be invited to an exclusive dinner on that Thursday night with members of the board of directors and some other special guests. And then we'll enjoy a half-day leadership summit all together Friday morning. And the leadership summit, for those of you who have been, is really fun and a great way to connect with your fellow NLC folks. It's inspiring because you feel like you're working so hard throughout the year, and then to come together and do some really thoughtful work around your continued commitment to CareJM is really great. As Jim mentioned, we are expanding our clinical care network to partner with more children's hospitals across the country and beyond. And that's really important because one of our priorities is to increase access to quality care for our kids. So that ensures that folks all across the country have access to good, sound doctors who are trained in JM. You probably hear my dog barking in the background. Apologies. We're also reopening a number of our chapters after COVID. I like to think of it as relaunching. Some of the chapters have been getting together in somewhat of a small capacity throughout COVID, but we're really making a concerted effort to get those chapters relaunched and reactivated and truly engaged in our work. More to come on those exciting programs throughout next year. I'd also like to add that all the research that Jim mentioned, such important progress, is made possible by the fundraising and generosity of this group gathered here. And as a parent, I'm incredibly grateful for each of you.
It's now my pleasure to introduce our guest of honor, and I want to just say a couple of things about Dr. Adam Huber, who is a member of CareJM's Medical Advisory Board. And the first thing you need to know about CareJM's Medical Advisory Board is that it is made up of the foremost experts in JDM research and clinical care in the world. There are 8 members of our medical advisory board. I'm not sure actually, Adam, how far back you go, but I know you were on the medical advisory board when I joined 8 years ago. So I know you've been here, quite a while in that in that role. And he has also really become a trusted advisor to not only me, but also to our research committee and members of our research committee. Our chief scientific officer also relies on Adam's guidance and advice on our grant development and grant selection process. He is Dr. Huber is a clinician at the IWK Health Center in Nova Scotia and a professor of medicine at Dalhousie University. And as I mentioned, a longtime and esteemed member and guidance counselor on our medical advisory board, really helping to develop and direct our research program. Dr. Huber, thanks so much for being with us, and over to you.
Thank you, Jim. I actually tried to figure out how many years I've been doing stuff with CareJM. It's at least 12, but probably closer to 15. I've reviewed grants, I've gone to your meetings. I think I've been to either 3 or 4 of your annual parent meetings. I have referred more patients than I can think of to the organization for support and all the information you guys provide. I've been in Halifax for 22 and a half years, looking after kids with myositis and other kids. And I'm really happy to be able to do stuff for CareJM because I think you guys have a wonderful organization and you guys are doing really, really important work. Okay, so are you guys able to see my slide? Fantastic. So yeah, I will thank Jim and Amy Erez, my apologies if I've gotten your name pronounced wrong, who prepared these slides. So the slides are theirs, but any editorial comments I make are mine. So I'll take responsibility for that. So as Jim said, I'm a pediatric rheumatologist in Halifax, Canada. I've been here for 22 and a half years, and I'm going to provide just a little bit of information. I think I'm going to repeat some of what Jim has already said, but this has really been a time where there's been steady and actually I would argue fairly rapid increase in juvenile myositis research and clinical care progress. CARRA has really taken a role as a true leader, and as Jim has said, both nationally and internationally, driving the juvenile myositis research agenda, and basically moving to improve and standardize clinical care, again, both in the United States, but beyond the United States borders. And CARRA does this partly by the work that you guys do yourselves, but also by partnering with a number of other organizations. And I can speak to at least one of those in some detail. So one of the very important things that CARRA has been doing now for actually quite a few years is the Centers of Excellence. As far as I understand, Duke and Lurie were the first ones. George Washington University was the third. And then more recently, Seattle and San Francisco have actually had centers. And these are centers that are supported financially, both for their clinical and for their research missions. And this is really important. These are some of the leading centers in the world in myositis care and research. And some of that work would be very challenging without the support that CARRA is able to provide. More recently has been this move towards the clinical care network. And this is a bit of a different thing. This is basically identification of centers that have juvenile myositis expertise, where people are interested in this illness, have experience looking after it. Research certainly is often a component of that. But these are centers that are not necessarily receiving sort of huge financial support from CARRA, although often they are receiving some support. But what's most important about this, to the next page, is that this basically gives families an ability to identify centers that actually have the expertise that is needed to look after their children. My hospital here in Halifax is one of these. On the next page, I can show you sort of a list of all the other ones. But the network really does aim to support development of clinical expertise. And that's really the focus of this, is the clinical expertise to look after. So on this page, you can see the 18 sites that have so far been identified. And I've no doubt that there are others that are being sort of brought into the fold as time goes by. Many of these sites have clinicians who actually have research grants or training grants from CARRA. And again, much of this work would be very, very difficult without that support. I will point out that 2 of these sites are in Canada, Toronto, where I trained with Brian Feldman, and our site out here in Halifax, and then also Great Ormond Street in London, where there really are some true leaders in this area. So the financial support to these centers is part of what's been a much larger research funding envelope, which apparently is up to $5 million, which is, I think, tremendous, and a huge thank you is necessary from a member of this community, but also congratulations on being what is really a small organization and really punching way above your weight. As one of my jobs on the medical advisory board is, I've actually sat on the subcommittee that reviews grants, really for, as I said, probably the last 10 or 12 or maybe as many as 15 years, which is a really important role because we have the scientific expertise to sort of try to decide whether something is good science or whether something is likely to result in some important advances. But we are not the ones that are actually establishing the CARRA's priorities. So we function as an advisory group to, I believe it's the research committee that our recommendations go up to, and then you guys make a decision as to how you want to spend your funds. So there are actually a couple of grants that Jim wanted to highlight, which we'll flip over to the next page. One is a grant from Joanna Parks, who is at a place called the Nucleic Acid Therapy Accelerator Hub. And this grant was actually so interesting and so cool that I actually had to pull about 20 papers to understand what the heck she was doing. This is really on the cutting edge. This is brand new stuff, which has potential to really be a brand new way of looking after autoimmune disease like myositis. It may actually even be beyond that. And so putting what's a relatively small amount of funding into this has the potential to really have a massive, massive impact down the road. The other project that was funded is to Dr. Chak Young Yu, who's at Nationwide and Ohio State. He's a bit on the split side. And he's established his career looking at a particular genetic difference in people where they have different numbers of copies of a gene for a protein called C3. He's combining this work looking at genetic studies of T cells and autoantibodies in myositis patients. And I think what's really important to recognize here is it's very difficult to determine optimal or new or innovative therapies when we don't really understand what's happening underneath and what part of the immune system is involved, how is that part of the immune system causing the illness that we see. And so understanding those details better with projects like this becomes really important in trying to figure, okay, well, what therapies would target that area. Jim has already spoken to this. I think we could sort of consider this one of the most recent initiatives for CureJM, but identifying the impacts both emotionally and on mental health of having a chronic illness like juvenile myositis. And I would actually emphasize this isn't actually just JM kids who struggle with this illness. This is families, parents, caregivers, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. And I think focusing on mental health and actually highlighting the importance of recognizing the mental health challenges is a huge change, and really something that nobody would have been talking about even 5 years ago. So I think I totally agree with Jim that CureJM really is way out in front on sort of taking this on as not just one thing, but as a priority. And there is the mental health symposium happening in a couple of days, which is going to be attended by people all over the world. And hopefully those people will take that education and that knowledge and that training and spread it within their circles. And so again, the impact on these 60 people will hopefully be much beyond those 60 people. Partnerships are obviously extraordinarily important in this kind of work, and particularly where CureJM is a relatively small organization, it's a relatively rare disease. Partnering with other organizations that actually can bring expertise and knowledge to bear is going to be critical. I have been involved with CARRA, which is the Childhood Arthritis and Rheumatology Research Alliance, pretty much since it was formed. We're a little bit older than CureJM, but not by much. And the structure of CARRA is that there are a number of disease-oriented groups, and myositis would be one of those groups. And then within the JDM committee, there are multiple work groups that are all working on individual kind of pieces of the pie. The use of biologic medicines in JM group is actually going to be publishing their first paper actually imminently. I've actually seen a draft of it, so hopefully it'll be submitted and available within the next month or two. There's a quality of care group that's looking to make sure that the care that's provided across different institutions, across different countries, is consistent and provides basically the best quality of care. There's a rehabilitation and exercise group, which is looking at the importance of exercise in the rehabilitation process of kids who are getting better with myositis. There's a couple of newer groups which formed over the COVID pandemic, one of which obviously is COVID, because it turns out that COVID may actually play a role in either triggering or sustaining myositis patients, and may even be capable of creating a new sort of type of myositis, which we're going to try to understand over the next few years. And also a virtual care group trying to ensure that children with myositis who are being seen by virtual care are still getting the best care possible. And finally, and I think to me, the most exciting is the translational medicine group. So this is a group of almost entirely very young investigators who are interested in studying myositis from the point of view of the underlying genetics, the underlying immune system, the underlying cells that are involved, which is hopefully going to lead us to a much better understanding of how does this illness happen, and subsequently, how do we treat this illness better? CureJM has been super important in this group for a couple of really key areas. One is that CureJM has supported the juvenile myositis component of the patient registry, which is critical because collecting large amounts of data on these patients is both expensive and challenging, but absolutely critical to understand what the course of these illnesses are. The second piece, which I think is even more important, is that CureJM has been instrumental in developing a biorepository. So collecting biological specimens, whether it's blood, primarily right now, but also down the road, hopefully muscle or other tissues, which again provide the kind of material that the basic scientists are going to need to really study this illness in detail. And you can recognize that at any one place, whether it's UCSF or a hospital in New York or here at IBK, nobody has enough patients to be able to do this work with more than a handful of samples. And so having repositories where somebody can go and look for 20 or 30 or 40 specimens on patients who have a similar point of their disease is going to be really important. So this actually commitment that CureJM has had towards this data and sample collection has recently been renewed, and we are extremely thankful for that because it really is critical to this field moving forward. So just a couple of kind of editorial comments in closing. I've been doing this since 2020. Since 2000. No, 2020 wouldn't be very long at all. Since 2000, and the changes in the field and the movement in the field has actually been tremendous. The awareness is much, much better. It's much less likely that patients are going to be seen and not recognized. We understand the pathogenesis or the underlying causes of this illness better, although we have a long way to go. And as Jim has already sort of rhymed off, we have a number of brand new drugs that are either on the verge of being available or are already available. And if you look before 2000, in fact, if you look before 2010, really nothing had changed in medications for decades before that. So this is really, really exciting. I think it's entirely true that the science never moves fast enough. I can imagine if you have a sick child, you want changes that happen tomorrow or yesterday. And that's simply not how well science works. But we are moving forward and we are developing, I think, things that really are going to change the lives of kids in the future. And CureJM really has put themselves at the absolute heart of this. With their funding, with initiatives like the Mental Health Initiative, with their support of meetings like the Global Conference on Myositis and bringing like-minded people from around the world into the same place. I think it really does speak to a bright future for children with myositis, with both improved outcomes and maybe someday cure, although first I would be happier that simply kids are doing better before we actually get to the point of cure. And I think that is all that I have to say, although, Jim, I'm more than happy to try to answer questions if there are any.
Yes, there's a couple questions in the chat. I think Amy is monitoring the chat, but people can also just speak up. So Amy, if you would you read out the first question in the chat?
Yes, I would definitely like to learn more about emotional and mental health, especially for younger kids. How much to share and how much to keep to just parental conversations is something my wife and I discuss regularly.
So I can certainly understand why you would be unsure, because I don't think anybody really knows the answers to those kinds of questions. It obviously varies hugely with the age of the child, the maturity of the child, the circumstances. I think one of the things that CureJM is doing in terms of educating professionals and then sending them back to their institutions is critical, and working with your clinicians to figure out, okay, well, what is the right thing to do? How much information is the right amount, I think is going to be key. There definitely isn't a cookie cutter to this. Every child is going to have a different circumstance. Every family is going to have a different circumstance. Personally, I do tend to make the assumption that children understand much more than we give them credit for, and in truth, handle stuff much better. And possibly more importantly, they know when they're not getting the whole story. And my personal experience has been that kids probably want more and need more information than their parents think they're ready for. That said, I obviously don't go down every rabbit hole and talk about every potential rare complication, but I do answer questions honestly. But I sort of, as a kind of a final end to that, I would refer you back to your myositis professional that you're working with, and ask those questions, because they know you and your child better than obviously I do, and you guys can work on a plan for that.
We also did a symposium, mental health symposium, a few months ago, and there's a video on our YouTube channel, so people can be referred to that. We had experts in the field, child psychologists and other therapists, talking about how to talk to your kids about emotional and mental health issues. So if that's something that is of interest, let me know. And also we can look at this, I think, in terms of a panel at our summer conference.
And I might also just add on to Dr. Huber's excellent advice. In addition to your healthcare provider, your child life specialist can also be really helpful. Our child life specialist gave us a nice chart that said, here's some talking points by age, which we kept and used for many years. So I would get in touch with Boston Children's and see what kinds of good resources they have.
Great.
I put a link to the YouTube channel in the chat if anybody wants to see that.
Thank you, Amy. And do you want to go on to the next question from Amy from, I'm sorry, the name just popped off, from
I think Rebecca Cox had the
Rebecca
next
Cox.
question.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm a JDM parent. My son has NXP2AB type JDM. Calcinosis cutis is the worst symptom he has. He's been on the regimen since diagnosis of January of this year, and his calcinosis is spreading and popping up in new spots on his body. Is IVIG something that we should try? Are any other drugs he is not on recommended?
It also says he's on hydroxychloroquine, mycophenolate, nifedipine, and doxycycline. And he has topical thiosulfate and tacrolimus. It's a lot of meds.
I've never been to a myositis meeting with patients or families present where somebody hasn't asked about calcinosis. I think calcinosis remains our absolute biggest challenge in myositis. It's worse than persistent skin disease, because even though that's obviously important, it's worse than the kids with severe early disease. And I think the problem with calcinosis is very much highlighted by what this parent has written about. There are a number of medications listed here. They've all been considered to be possible therapies for calcinosis. But as a rule of thumb, if there's 10 or 20 different possible treatments for something, it's because none of them have really turned out to be the key and obvious treatment. And I think, unfortunately, the challenge is we don't really know how to treat calcinosis very well at all. It's, I think it's one of the areas that we need the most work. Everything that you've listed here are therapies that people have thought would be possible. None of them nothing on this list has ever been proven to be the sort of panacea. IVIG would certainly be something reasonable to try, particularly if there's ongoing active skin disease with rash and stuff on top of the calcinosis. There was a clinical trial at NIH relatively recently. I'm not sure if it's actually still open, using a fairly intense IV thiosulfate protocol, which I've not seen any results of yet. But that would certainly be one thing to potentially look into. It wouldn't be the kind of thing that would be done locally. It would need to be done as part of that trial. But certainly IVIG is not an unreasonable thing to try. Relative to some things, it's relatively benign. I can't guarantee that it would be effective because that's very much the challenge with calcinosis. I assume he's had disease for many years. And that's often the circumstance we find ourselves, is that sometimes 5, sometimes longer years out, everything else seems to have improved and the calcinosis is an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, he was diagnosed this past January, and he's been on this regimen since then. But again, it's getting worse. So weeding some of these out and adding some other drugs, is that possibly recommended? It just doesn't seem like this is the regimen he's on isn't helping curtail the spread of the disease.
How is his rash and his strength doing?
He fatigues pretty quickly. He's a strong little dude. He's not as energetic, obviously, as he used to be. He does have the typical red rash, but it's mainly the open wounds and the calcinosis is mainly concentrated right now on the muscles above the elbow and on the elbow.
Okay. So obviously without seeing him, I can't give sort of formal advice. What I can say is from the list of things that he's on, both nifedipine and doxycycline would be sort of medications that there was some initial excitement about and probably don't really have a lot of support as far as ongoing medications go. Hydroxychloroquine certainly can be a useful JDM drug. Mycophenolate is, for some kids, actually a very, very good medication. Has he ever been on methotrexate?
No, just the ones that I've listed he's been on. He was prescribed prednisone, but the dermatologist, along with the rheumatologist, thought that it was best not to put him on that at the time. So he hasn't had.
Okay, that would be a little out of the ordinary. Again, I would without knowing the exact circumstances. Certainly, if he still has active rash, if he still has fatigability, I would want to see some blood work to sort of see what his muscle enzymes look like, or maybe an MRI. But sort of escalating his therapy in a more sort of aggressive immune suppressing fashion, which could include steroids, it could include methotrexate, it certainly could include IVIG. I think all of those would be potential options. I have to say, I'm a little surprised that he has such progressive calcinosis when he hasn't even gotten past his first year of illness. That would be a little bit unusual. I suppose the other thing to consider would actually be, I have no idea where you are and I have no idea who you're seeing, but looking for a second opinion from kind of one of the sort of leaders in the area, whether it was Brian Feldman in Toronto or Lisa Ryder at NIH or one of the other kind of people that quite frankly are on the MAB, would actually also be very reasonable, since obviously you guys are not on the winning side right now.
Right. We are in Wisconsin. I guess the Chicago hospital would be closest to us then, or is that just a research hospital?
I can text you some of the options, Rebecca. And also I'll text you the number to call about the clinical trial. They are still taking patients for calcinosis as of last week. One of our youngsters in Wyoming was just accepted. So I'll send you that information, Rebecca, by text.
Right. Yep. He did actually qualify for the trial, but I didn't get any response back from the NIH. But the lady I spoke to says he did qualify, and I was supposed to get a phone call a couple weeks ago about it, and I didn't receive anything. So I don't know.
We can help move that along for you as well. So I'll reach out in a couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you so very much.
So
Okay.
one more question for Dr. Huber. Is research into necrotizing myopathy in children included in CureJM's research?
So certainly theoretically, yes. Right now, necrotizing myopathy would be classified as a juvenile polymyositis. As has happened in the adult world, there's certainly a move towards identifying it specifically as its own form of myositis, since it does have a fairly clear, kind of typical clinical picture, and the antibody profile is often quite diagnostic. The challenge is it's relatively rare in adults and it's extremely rare in children. And so doing research when there's really only a handful of kids is very challenging, but absolutely it is included. Although I couldn't sort of point to a specific project looking at that illness separately, but it would be part of everything else that's being done for sure.
All right. Well, we're
My apologies for
coming
my
up on
dog
the,
in the background.
we're coming up on the on the 5-minute mark. And Dr. Huber, thank you so much. That was an extraordinary presentation, and we are forever grateful for your many years of leadership, past, present, and future with CureJM. I think all of you can see why Dr. Huber is such an important asset to helping us accomplish our mission. So thank you again. With that, Shannon, or do you look like you wanted to say something, Adam?
I was just going to say I'm always happy to help, and really, if there's ever questions or anything that I can do, you guys know you all just need to reach out. But I will drop off, let you enjoy the rest of your meeting.
All right.
Take
Thank you,
care,
Adam.
everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Huber. Well, thank you guys all for joining. Dave or I will be in touch about the next call coming up. And just a quick plug, we do have a very exciting call coming up on November 1st. Amy, do you want to give the update on that so people can mark their calendars for the next really big and exciting research update that we have? It'll be November 1st at
12 o'clock
noon
Eastern.
Yep.
Mhm.
And who do you have lined up, Amy?
Dr. Ardalan, Andrew Heaton, Tom Hume, and Jim will be moderator.
Great. So that'll be an exciting call to hear from co-founder Tom Hume and Dr. Ardalan on some new treatments that are coming down the pipe for JM. So mark your calendars for November 1st, and we'll be in touch with more stuff as we build up to Giving Tuesday.